bronze infantrymen faced east, toward a sunrise he'd never see again, rifle frozen mid-stride across a pedestal stained with 30 years of Carolina rain. Marcus Cole sat on the bench beneath him, close enough to read the names etched into the black granite wall, but never looking at them directly. Looking directly meant remembering. November had come to Carverton with its usual dishonesty, warm enough at noon to trick a man into leaving his coat unbuttoned, cold enough by 4 o'clock to make him regret it. Marcus had learned to distrust the light. He buttoned up at 2:30 when the shadows started stretching, and tucked his hands into pockets worn thin at the seams. His left hand found the familiar shape there, the photograph, folded so many times the crease had become a white scar across the faces. He didn't take it out, not during the day. Daylight was for watching the memorial, for nodding at the women who walked their dogs along the perimeter path, for pretending he was just another old man resting his legs. Only at night, when the street lamps buzzed orange and the last jogger had gone home, did he unfold the photograph and look at the men who'd trusted him. A Parks Department truck rumbled past on the access road, slowing near the memorial's wrought iron gate. Marcus tracked it without moving his head. 3 times this week, the same truck. The driver never got out, just idled there, watching, making notes. Marcus understood. He'd outlasted his welcome. He rose before the truck could stop, gathered the canvas duffel that held everything he still owned, and walked south toward the tree line. Not running. He hadn't run from anything since Kuwait, but not lingering either. A man learned the rhythm of being moved along. You could keep your dignity if you left before they asked. The VFW hall sat a half-mile down Route 18, a flat-roofed building with an American flag that needed replacing and a parking lot that needed patching. Marcus had eaten there twice, back when he'd still believed in the system enough to fill out forms. The woman at the desk had been kind, but kindness with paperwork attached always came with strings. He'd stopped going after the 3rd form asked for a permanent address. He didn't need their help. He'd survived the berm. He'd survived Lydia's last 6 months, the hospice smell, the mortgage company's letters arriving before she was cold. He could survive a Carolina November. The rumble came from the north, not the truck, something heavier. Marcus turned instinctively, old training surfacing before thought could catch it. Motorcycles, 4 of them, slowing at the memorial entrance, chrome catching the weak afternoon light. He kept walking. Deacon Ray Womack killed his engine and let the quiet settle. The memorial looked smaller than he remembered, the bronze soldier more weathered, but the names on the wall hadn't changed. 3rd row, 7th from the left. PFC Timothy Ray Womack, 1971. He didn't come here. Often. Twice a year, Tim's birthday in March and the week before Veterans Day when the crowds hadn't gathered yet, and he could stand alone with his brother, without some mayor making a speech about sacrifice, as if sacrifice was something you talked about instead of carried. Deacon, Rooster's voice low, 2 o'clock. Deacon followed the younger man's gaze toward the tree line, a figure moving away, deliberate, a duffel over one shoulder. Something in the gait, the economy of it, the way the man checked his flanks without turning his head. He was on the bench when we pulled up, Rooster said. Moved out quick. I saw. You want me to... No. Deacon swung his leg over the bike and walked toward the granite wall alone. The man was already gone, swallowed by the pines. He stood before Tim's name and did what he always did. Nothing. No prayer, no speech, just presence. The oncologist had given him 14 months, 18 with treatment, and Deacon hadn't told the club yet. Hadn't told anyone except the God he'd spent 40 years arguing with. The wind shifted. From somewhere in the pines came the thin sound of coughing, not a cold, but the deep, wet rattle of a man who'd been sleeping rough. Deacon knew that cough. He'd heard it in field hospitals, in shelters, in the back pews of churches that opened their doors in January. He reached into his cut and found the challenge coin he always carried. Tim's coin, recovered from his effects, the bronze eagle almost smooth now from decades of his thumb running across it. Rooster. Yeah? Find out who runs the homeless outreach in this county. And get me a name at the VA in Charlotte. He paused, quietly. Rooster didn't ask why. That was why Deacon kept him close. The man in the trees had stopped coughing. Deacon pocketed the coin and walked back to his bike, but he didn't start it. Not yet. The bronze soldier faced east, frozen forever in his charge toward morning. Somewhere behind him, a living soldier was trying to disappear. Deacon had 14 months, maybe 18, enough time to find out why a man with infantry in his walk was running from a war memorial instead of toward it. Gerald Hatch sat alone in his office at Town Hall, the fluorescent lights humming their evening song. On his desk, 3 voicemails from the governor's advance team, a draft press release about the Veterans Day ceremony, and a photograph in a silver frame that he hadn't looked at directly in years. His father, PFC Ronald Hatch, Korea, 1952. The only picture that survived the fire that took the family home when Gerald was 11. He looked at it now. The governor was coming in 6 days. The memorial needed to be perfect, not just clean, but dignified, a place worthy of the men whose names were carved into that wall. And every morning for the past 2 weeks, Gerald had received the same report from Parks. The homeless man was back, sleeping on the bench, leaving food wrappers in the trash can, making the dog. Walker's uncomfortable. Gerald had tried the gentle approach first. He'd sent Officer Reyes to have a conversation, offer resources, point the man toward the shelter in Monroe. Reyes reported back that the man had listened politely, nodded, and returned the next night. The phone on his desk buzzed. Marlene, his assistant, gone for the day, but the voicemail light insistent. Mr. Hatch, this is Jennifer Cates from the Piedmont Tribune. I'm working on a story about homeless veterans in the region ahead of Veterans Day. I understand there's been some activity at your town memorial. Would love to get a comment from your office about how Carverton supports its veteran community. Please call me back. Gerald deleted the message and pressed his palms against his eyes. A reporter, of course. The last thing he needed was a story about Carverton pushing out a homeless veteran the week before the governor laid a wreath. He picked up the phone and dialed the county sheriff's non-emergency line. The pines offered shelter but not warmth. Marcus had found a spot where 3 old oaks grew close enough to block the wind, their roots creating a natural hollow he could line with cardboard from the recycling bins behind the grocery store. It wasn't the memorial bench, but it was something. He'd learned to sleep light, waking at every snapped branch, every distant engine. Tonight, the cold had settled into his joints early, and sleep wouldn't come at all. He sat with his back against the largest oak and took out the photograph. 8 men, desert behind them, the berm rising in the distance. March 1991. He could still name them left to right. Kowalski, Davis, Pham, himself, Rodriguez, Little Mike, Thompson, and Sergeant Womack. Billy Womack, who everyone called Preacher because he read his Bible every night and never swore, not even when the mortars fell. Billy Womack, who'd followed Marcus's order to check the abandoned vehicle. Billy Womack, who'd been 23 years old and 2 weeks from rotating home. Marcus folded the photograph and tucked it back into his coat, his fingers brushing the hard shape sewn into the lining. The metal. Lydia had sewn it there herself after he'd tried to throw it away the first time. You earned it, she'd said, even if you can't remember why. He hadn't earned anything. He'd gotten 7 men home and lost the one who deserved to make it most. The coughing started again, deep in his chest, and he pressed his fist against his mouth to muffle it. Sound carried at night. He'd survived 3 years on the street by being invisible, and invisible men didn't cough loud enough to wake the neighborhood. Morning came gray and damp. Marcus walked to the gas station on Route 18, used the bathroom to wash his face and hands, bought a coffee with the last of his change. The woman behind the counter didn't look at him, which was fine. He didn't need to be looked at. He needed to be left alone. But when he returned to the memorial, habit, stronger than sense, he found he wasn't alone. The biker from yesterday sat on the bench, a paper cup steaming in his hands. He didn't look up when Marcus approached, just shifted slightly to make room. An invitation, not a demand. Marcus stayed standing. You drink coffee? The man's voice was gravel and smoke. Got an extra. I'm fine. Didn't ask if you were fine. Asked if you drink coffee. The man reached into a saddlebag on the ground beside him and produced a second cup. He set it on the bench between them and went back to watching the bronze soldier. Marcus looked at the cup, looked at the man, looked at the cup again. His hands were cold enough that the decision made itself. He sat on the far end of the bench and picked up the coffee. They sat in silence for a long time. The man didn't ask his name, didn't offer his own, didn't make small talk about the weather, or ask where Marcus was staying. He just sat there, drinking his coffee, watching the memorial like it owed him something. Finally, the man spoke. "My brother's on that wall, 3rd row." Marcus said nothing. "Timothy, Tim. Everyone called him Preacher on account of—" The man stopped, shook his head. "Doesn't matter what they called him. He's been dead 53 years. Preacher." Marcus's hand tightened on the cup. Womack, 3rd row. The name he'd seen on the wall 100 times without connecting it, without letting himself connect it. "I had a preacher too," Marcus heard himself say. "Different war. Didn't make it home either." The man turned and looked at him for the first time. Gray eyes, weathered face, the kind of stillness that came from carrying weight for decades. What was his name? Womack. The word came out rough. Billy Womack. The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. He reached into his cut and pulled out a bronze coin, held it up so Marcus could see the eagle on one side, the Marine Corps emblem on the other. "This was my brother Tim's. Billy was his son." The coffee cup slipped from Marcus's fingers. It hit the ground and rolled, brown liquid spreading across the concrete. "He wrote me letters," the man continued, his voice steady. "From the desert. Talked about his sergeant. Man named Cole who looked out for him, who treated him like family when family was 7,000 miles away." Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The photograph in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I'm Ray Womack. Billy called me Uncle Deacon." The man, Deacon, extended his hand. "I've been wondering about you for 34 years, Sergeant Cole. Wondering if you made it home. Wondering if you remembered him." A Parks Department truck pulled into the memorial lot. The same driver, the same clipboard. But this time he got out, walked toward them with purpose, a folded paper in his hand. "Mr. Cole," the driver looked uncomfortable, "I'm required to give you this. Town ordinance. You've got 48 hours to vacate the memorial grounds or you'll be arrested for trespassing." He thrust the paper toward Marcus, then retreated to his truck, like the words themselves might be contagious. Deacon took the paper before Marcus could, read it, folded it carefully and slipped it into his own pocket. 48 hours, he said. "That's enough time." Enough time for what? Deacon stood, lifted his saddlebag, and looked down at the man who'd led his nephew through a war. "You carried Billy. Now let someone carry you." Marcus shook his head, the old reflex rising. I didn't ask what you need." Deacon's voice was firm but not unkind. "I'm telling you what's going to happen. You're going to let me buy you breakfast. You're going to tell me about Billy, and then we're going to figure out what comes next." He paused. "That's not charity. That's family taking care of family. Billy would have done the same for mine." In his office, Gerald Hatch stared at the ordinance he'd signed that morning. 48 hours. The memorial would be clear for the governor's visit. The problem would be solved. He pulled out the silver frame and looked at his father's face, 22 years old in that photograph, younger than Gerald's own son was now. His father had died in a place called Chosin, surrounded by men he'd never met 6 months earlier, and would have died for without hesitation. Gerald had grown up on stories about those men, the bonds forged in impossible cold, the loyalty that transcended everything. The homeless man at the memorial had that same look. Gerald had seen it in the Parks Department photos, the way he held himself, the way he watched the wall. Gerald put the frame face down on his desk and reached for the phone to return the reporter's call. He had a statement to make about how Carverton supported its veterans. He just wasn't sure anymore if it was true. The Lamplighter Diner had occupied the same corner of Main Street since 1962, its chrome stools and Formica counters unchanged, except for the wear patterns left by 3 generations of elbows. Deacon led Marcus to the back booth, the one with a clear sight line to both doors. Old habits. Marcus ordered eggs and toast. Deacon ordered the same, plus a side of bacon. He slid across the table without comment. They ate in silence for the first few minutes, the way men do when words are coming but haven't arrived yet. "Tell me about him," Deacon said finally, "not how he died, how he lived." Marcus set down his fork. The question caught him off guard. Everyone always wanted to know about the end, the explosion, the sacrifice. No one ever asked about the rest. "He sang," Marcus said. "Hymns, mostly." Under his breath, while he cleaned his weapon, drove Rodriguez crazy. A pause. "He wrote letters to everyone. His mom, his girl back home, you. Said he was documenting history. Said someone had to remember what it felt like to be there. He sent me 43 letters. Deacon's voice was quiet. I kept every one. He talked about you, said you were the reason he enlisted, said if his uncle could survive the Mekong Delta, he could survive anything. Deacon's hand moved to his chest, pressed flat against his sternum. I told him not to go. Told him one Womack in the ground was enough. He shook his head. He didn't listen, said some things were worth the risk. The waitress refilled their coffee. Marcus wrapped both hands around the cup, absorbing the warmth. 3 years since he'd sat in a diner like this. 3 years since someone had sat across from him and asked him questions that mattered. The vehicle, Marcus said. The words came slow, pulled from somewhere deep. We'd been taking fire all morning. Command said the road was clear, but there was this truck, just sitting there. Wrong place, wrong angle. I told Billy to check it out because he had the best eyes in the unit. I should have gone myself. I was the sergeant. It was my call. And it was rigged. Pressure plate. He never saw it coming. Marcus's voice cracked. I gave him that order. I killed him. No. Deacon's hand came down on the table, firm but not angry. The men who planted that bomb killed him. The war killed him. You gave an order because that was your job, and Billy followed it because that was his. That's not murder. That's service. Marcus shook his head. His mother died in '08. Stroke. She never blamed you, Marcus. She told me once that she was grateful her boy had a sergeant who cared enough to carry the weight. Deacon leaned forward. You've been carrying it for 34 years. Don't you think it's time to set it down? The bell over the diner door chimed. Rooster walked in, spotted them in the back, made his way over with a folder tucked under his arm. Got what you asked for. He slid the folder across to Deacon. And something else. That reporter from the Tribune? She's been digging. Found out our friend here, a nod toward Marcus, has a Bronze Star. Awarded for actions in the Gulf. Classified citation, but she's got a source at the VA who confirmed it. Marcus went still. The metal in his coat lining seemed to burn against his ribs. Deacon opened the folder, scanned the contents, and looked up at Marcus with an expression that was hard to read. Classified citation. That means you did something they couldn't talk about. Something bigger than checking a truck. He closed the folder. You want to tell me, or should I have Rooster's guy dig deeper? The silence stretched. Marcus could feel the walls he'd built pressing in, the same walls that had kept him alive on the street, kept him invisible, kept him from having to explain himself to anyone. 14 men, he said finally. Ambush site. Our convoy drove into it blind. I saw the setup before they opened fire, got most of our guys to cover, called in air support. He swallowed. Took out 3 positions myself before the helicopters arrived. Command said I saved the convoy, said I was a hero. And Billy? That was 2 weeks later. Different day, different road. I saved 14 strangers and couldn't save the one man who... Marcus stopped, pressed his palms against his eyes. They gave me a medal for the ambush and sent me home. No medal for Billy, just a folded flag and a letter I couldn't read out loud at his funeral. Deacon was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his cut and pulled out the challenge coin again, set it on the table between them. Tim's coin, he said. I've carried it for 53 years. It doesn't make the weight lighter, but it reminds me that some things are worth carrying. He pushed the coin toward Marcus. Keep it. Billy would have wanted you to have something from his family. Marcus stared at the coin. I can't. You can. Deacon stood, left cash on the table. I've got calls to make. The club rides for its own, and you're our own now, whether you like it or not. The calls went out that afternoon. Rooster worked the phone tree while Deacon rode to Charlotte to meet with his contact at the VA. By evening, word had spread through 6 chapters across 3 states. A veteran was in trouble in Carverton, and the Iron Horses were responding, but Gerald Hatch had made calls of his own. The emergency injunction arrived at the memorial at 4 p.m. the next day, 20 hours before the original deadline. A county judge had signed it that morning, citing public safety concerns ahead of the governor's visit. The memorial grounds were now closed to all non-essential personnel. Anyone found on the premises would be arrested immediately. Marcus heard about it from the gas station attendant, who'd heard it from her cousin at the courthouse. He was standing at the edge of the pines when the sheriff's deputies arrived to post the notices. Yellow tape went up around the memorial. The bronze soldier stood alone behind it, still facing east, still frozen mid-stride. Marcus watched from the shadows, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt something besides numb. He felt like a problem, a burden, an obstacle that decent people had to work around. Deacon had called him family, had said the club was coming, but Marcus had been in the service long enough to know what happened when a mission got complicated. Someone did the math, weighed the costs, decided it wasn't worth it. He'd seen it in the Gulf, seen it in the VA waiting rooms, seen it in the eyes of the social workers who promised to call back and never did. He wouldn't be the reason good men got arrested. Wouldn't be the story on the evening news about a homeless vagrant disrupting the governor's ceremony. Wouldn't let Billy's uncle throw away his reputation on a lost cause. Marcus gathered his duffel from the hollow between the oaks, took one last look at the memorial, at the name on the wall he'd never let himself touch. Then he walked north, away from Carverton, away from the bronze soldier, away from the first people who'd treated him like a human being in longer than he could remember. By the time Deacon arrived at the memorial with 32 riders behind him, Marcus Cole was gone. He was here this morning, the gas station attendant said. Bought coffee, like always. Then I heard about the injunction and figured, she shrugged, he's not the type to cause trouble. Probably just moved on. Deacon stood at the yellow tape, staring at the empty bench. The challenge coin was gone. Marcus had taken it at least. That meant something. We find him, Brewster said. It wasn't a question. We find him. Deacon pulled out his phone, dialed a number he hadn't called in 7 years. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. Dad? The voice was wary, guarded. Is something wrong? Deacon closed his eyes. His son Danny, the minister, the one who'd stopped speaking to him after the divorce, the one who ran a homeless outreach in Monroe. I need your help, Deacon said. There's a man, a veteran. He's lost, and he doesn't know he deserves to be found. Silence on the line. Then, tell me where you are. The sun set over Carverton, painting the memorial in shades of red and gold. Behind the yellow tape, the bronze soldier held his eternal charge. And somewhere on the dark roads north, a man walked alone with a coin in his pocket and 34 years of grief on his back, not knowing that the sound of engines was coming for him whether he wanted it or not. Danny Womack arrived in Carverton at 9 p.m., driving a church van with Grace Fellowship Monroe stenciled on the side. He was 41 years old, had his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn jaw, and hadn't spoken more than a dozen words to Deacon since the divorce split the family like kindling. He found his father standing alone at the edge of the memorial parking lot, 32 motorcycles gleaming under the streetlights behind him. You look older, Danny said. I am older. Deacon didn't move to embrace him, didn't know if he'd be welcome. Thank you for coming. You said he was a veteran, that he's lost. Danny looked past his father toward the yellow tape, the dark silhouette of the bronze soldier. I've been doing this work for 12 years. They're all lost, Dad. What makes this one different? Deacon reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph Marcus had shown him at the diner. 8 men in the desert, young and alive and unaware of what was coming. He handed it to Danny without a word. Danny studied the faces, stopped on one. That's Cousin Billy. The man next to him is Marcus Cole, Billy's sergeant. He gave the order that got Billy killed, and he's been punishing himself for it ever since. Deacon's voice was steady, but his hands weren't. He's been sleeping at this memorial for weeks, watching the wall. I think he's been waiting to die near the closest thing to a grave Billy has. Danny was quiet for a long moment. The outreach network covers 6 counties. If he's on foot, he won't get far. Tonight, I'll make some calls. Danny. Deacon caught his son's arm as he turned away. I'm sick. Cancer. The doctors give me a year, maybe less. The words hung in the cold air between them. Danny's face went through something complicated. Anger, grief, the old resentment, and beneath it all, the love that had never quite died. Were you going to tell me? I'm telling you now. Danny pulled his arm free, but gently. Find your veteran, Dad. Then we'll talk about the rest. The outreach network found Marcus at 2 a.m., huddled in a bus shelter 14 miles north of Carverton. He'd walked until his legs gave out, then sat down to wait for morning, or for something worse. The cough had gotten bad. His hands shook when he reached for the coin in his pocket. Danny approached alone, leaving the van running. He sat down on the bench beside Marcus the same way his father had 2 days earlier, not too close, not asking permission. "I'm Danny Womack," he said, "Deacon's son, Billy's cousin." Marcus didn't look up. "He shouldn't have called you. I'm not worth the trouble." "That's not your decision to make." Danny's voice was gentle but firm, the voice of a man who'd had this conversation 100 times before. "You served your country for 20 years. You saved 14 men in an ambush. You carried my cousin through a war and held him when he died. And you've been sleeping in the cold for 3 years because you think you don't deserve a roof." He paused. "Tell me how that math works, Sergeant Cole, because I can't make it add up." Marcus was silent. "My father is dying," Danny continued. "He didn't tell anyone until tonight. Rode up here with 30 men behind him chasing a ghost because he thinks helping you is the last thing he can do that matters." He leaned forward. "You can walk away, that's your right. But if you do, you're not just giving up on yourself. You're taking something from him he'll never get back." The bus shelter hummed with silence. Somewhere in the distance, a truck downshifted on the highway. Marcus pulled the challenge coin from his pocket and looked at it for a long time. The bronze eagle, the Marine Corps emblem. 53 years of wait passed from one soldier's family to another. "Billy used to say that courage wasn't about not being afraid," Marcus said quietly. "It was about being afraid and showing up anyway." Sounds like something his grandfather would have said. Tim was the same way. Marcus closed his fist around the coin. "Your father really dying?" "Yes." "Then I guess I better show up." They drove back to Carverton in silence, Marcus wrapped in a blanket from the van's emergency kit, watching the dark fields slide past. When they pulled into the memorial parking lot, the crowd had grown. 50 bikes now, maybe more, their riders clustered in small groups, breath fogging in the November cold. And standing apart from the others, at the edge of the yellow tape, was Gerald Hatch. Jennifer Cates had called him 3 hours earlier, the reporter from the Tribune, the one he'd been avoiding. She'd told him what she'd found, a Bronze Star recipient living homeless at the memorial he managed, a classified citation that, when she finally got a source to describe it, detailed how Sergeant Marcus Cole had single-handedly held off an ambush, called in air support under fire, and carried 2 wounded men to safety before the helicopters arrived. "I'm running the story tomorrow," she'd said. Front page. The question is whether the headline is about how Carverton honored a hero or how they threw him out like trash. Gerald had hung up the phone and sat in his office for a long time, looking at his father's photograph. PFC Ronald Hatch, Korea, 1952. A boy who'd frozen to death at Chosin so that other men could live. What would his father think of him now? The answer brought him to the memorial at midnight, still wearing his work clothes, standing at the yellow tape he'd ordered put up, waiting. Now he watched the church van pull in, watched a thin figure in a blanket step out, watched the crowd of bikers part to let the man through. Gerald recognized him from the Parks Department photos, the veteran, Cole. Deacon stepped forward to meet Marcus, and the 2 men stood face to face for a moment before Deacon pulled him into an embrace. No words, just presence. Gerald made his decision. He walked to the yellow tape and pulled it down himself, wadding it into a ball that he stuffed into his coat pocket. Then he walked to where Deacon and Marcus stood. "Mr. Cole," his voice came out rough, "I'm Gerald Hatch, town manager. I'm the one who signed the order to remove you." He paused, forced himself to meet Marcus's eyes. "I was wrong." Marcus studied him with the same quiet assessment he'd used on the Parks Department truck, on the bikers, on everyone who'd approached him in 3 years of living invisible. Why the change of heart? "My father died in Korea, Chosin Reservoir. He was 22. Gerald reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded letter, yellowed with age. "He wrote this to my mother the week before he died. I've read it 1,000 times. He talked about the men in his unit, how they looked out for each other, how they shared everything, how the only thing that mattered was making sure the guy next to you made it home." He handed the letter to Marcus. "I forgot what that meant. I was so worried about the governor's visit, about how things would look, that I forgot what the memorial was actually for." Gerald's voice cracked. "It's not for politicians. It's not for ceremonies. It's for men like you. Men like my father. Men who gave everything and got forgotten anyway." Marcus read the letter slowly, then folded it and handed it back. "Your father sounds like a good man." He was. I'm trying to be. The crowd had drawn closer, forming a loose circle around them. Rooster, Danny, the other riders, the gas station attendant who'd been kind when she didn't have to be. Jennifer Cates, standing at the edge with a notebook she wasn't writing in. The injunction, Deacon said. It's still in effect. I'll handle it. Gerald pulled out his phone. Judge Morrison owes me a favor. By morning, this memorial will be open to anyone who wants to pay their respects. He looked at Marcus, including you, Sergeant Cole, especially you. Marcus nodded slowly. Then he reached into his coat, fumbled with the lining, and pulled out something that caught the streetlight, a bronze star, tarnished with age but unmistakable. My wife sewed it in there, he said, after I tried to throw it away. She said I earned it, even if I couldn't remember why. He held it out to Gerald. I'm starting to remember. Gerald didn't take the medal. That's yours, Sergeant. You keep it. I don't need it anymore. Marcus pressed it into Gerald's hand. Give it to the memorial. Put it in a case somewhere. Let people see that the men on that wall, they had brothers who came home, brothers who are still fighting even when nobody's watching. The crowd was silent. Jennifer Cates had stopped pretending not to write. Deacon stepped forward and put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Billy would be proud of you. Billy would tell me I talk too much. Marcus's voice was rough, but there was something in it that hadn't been there before, something that sounded almost like peace. He'd say, Sarge, shut up and let people help you for once. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the crowd. Dawn's coming, Danny said, looking east. The ceremony's in 2 days. What happens until then? Deacon looked at his son, then at Marcus, then at the memorial where his brother's name had been carved for 53 years. We wait, he said. Together, the way it's supposed to be. The first light of Veterans Day Eve broke over Carverton at 6:47 a.m. The bronze soldier faced it the way he always had, rifle raised, frozen mid-stride, but he wasn't alone anymore. 53 motorcycles lined the memorial drive. Their riders stood in a loose formation around the granite wall, coffee cups steaming, breath fogging, leather creaking in the cold. At the center of them all, on the bench he'd claimed weeks ago, sat Marcus Cole. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't running. He was just sitting there, looking at the names on the wall, letting himself be seen. Gerald Hatch arrived at 7 with a box of donuts and a formal apology. He'd stayed up all night writing. Marcus listened to the whole thing, then shook his hand and told him to save the speech for the ceremony. Jennifer Cates arrived at 8 with a photographer. Her story would run the next morning, front page, above the fold, Bronze Star Veteran Finds Brotherhood at Carverton Memorial. She'd already gotten calls from 3 wire services, and at 9, a black SUV pulled into the lot, flying small American flags from its antenna. The governor's advance team arriving a day early to see what all the fuss was about. They found a town manager standing with a biker gang, a homeless veteran holding court on a bench, and a bronze soldier facing east toward a sunrise that finally meant something again. 6 months later, the dogwoods were blooming along Route 18 when Marcus Cole pulled into the memorial parking lot on a motorcycle he'd rebuilt himself. A 1992 Harley Softail, donated by the Iron Horses after its owner passed, restored in the garage behind Danny Womack's church, where Marcus now lived in the converted apartment above. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the tick of cooling metal. The bronze soldier still faced east. The names on the wall hadn't changed, but a new glass case had been installed beside the granite, and inside it sat a bronze star on a bed of black velvet, a small placard explaining what it meant and who had earned it. Marcus didn't look at the case. He looked at the bench where he'd spent those November weeks, where he'd met a stranger who turned out to be family, where he'd finally stopped running from a war that had ended 34 years ago. Deacon was already there, sitting in his usual spot, a paper cup steaming in his hands. The chemo had taken his hair and 20 pounds, but not his stillness, not his presence. You're late, Deacon said. Carburetor was acting up. Marcus sat down beside him. Danny says you missed your appointment yesterday. Danny talks too much. He's your son. It's his job. Deacon made a sound that might have been a laugh. The relationship between him and Danny was still complicated. 7 years of silence didn't heal in 6 months, but they were trying. Sunday dinners at the church, phone calls that lasted longer than they used to. Danny had driven his father to 4 of the last 6 chemo sessions, and Deacon had sat in the back pew for 2 of Danny's sermons. Small steps, but steps. The town council voted last night, Deacon said. Gerald pushed it through. They're naming the memorial park after Tim and Billy. Womack Veterans Memorial Park. Ceremony's next month. Marcus nodded slowly. He's a good man, Gerald. Took him a while to figure it out, but he got there. Gerald Hatch had resigned as town manager 2 months after Veterans Day, not in disgrace, but in purpose. He'd taken a position with the State Veterans Affairs Office, processing benefits claims, cutting through the bureaucracy that had failed men like Marcus for decades. The work paid less than half his old salary. He'd told Jennifer Cates in a follow-up interview that it was the first job he'd had since college that let him sleep at night. Rooster's got the ride organized, Deacon continued. First Saturday in November, every year. Start at the VFW in Charlotte, end here. They're calling it the Womack Run. How many signed up? 112 last count, growing every week. Marcus pulled the challenge coin from his pocket, Tim's coin, Billy's inheritance, his now, and turned it over in his fingers. The bronze eagle had worn smoother in the months since Deacon had given it to him. He carried it everywhere, the way Deacon had for 53 years. Some weights you didn't set down. You just learned to carry them differently. I talked to the VA yesterday, Marcus said. They approved my disability claim. Back pay for 3 years, plus monthly from here on. He paused. I'm thinking about going back to school. Danny knows a program for veterans at the community college, counseling degree. Figured maybe I could help guys like me, guys who got lost. Deacon was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over and put a hand on Marcus's shoulder, the same way he had that night at the memorial when the yellow tape came down. Billy would be proud of you. You already said that. Worth saying twice. They sat in comfortable silence as the morning traffic picked up on Route 18. Dog walkers circled the memorial path. A young mother pushed a stroller past the bronze soldier, pausing to read the names on the wall, life continuing, the way it always did, around the monuments to those who'd given theirs. How much time? Marcus asked finally. The question he'd been afraid to ask for months. Deacon didn't pretend to misunderstand. Doctors say 6 months, maybe less. He took a sip of his coffee, watching the bronze soldier. I've had 62 years. Tim got 19. Billy got 23. I figure I came out ahead. Doesn't make it fair. Nothing's fair. That's not the point. Deacon turned to look at Marcus directly. The point is what you do with what you get. Tim did something with 19 years. Billy did something with 23. I've tried to do something with 62. He nodded toward the glass case, the bronze star gleaming in the morning light. And you're going to do something with whatever comes next. That's how it works. Not because anyone owes anyone, because that's what family does. Marcus thought about Lydia, who'd sewn a medal into his coat because she believed in him, even when he couldn't believe in himself. About Billy, who'd followed him into danger because that's what soldiers did for sergeants they trusted. About Deacon, who'd spent 53 years carrying a coin for a brother he'd never stopped missing. About Danny, who'd answered a phone call from a father he had every reason to ignore. About Gerald, who'd torn down his own yellow tape. About all the small choices, the ordinary kindnesses, the decisions to show up even when showing up was hard. Same time next week? Marcus asked. Same time every week, Deacon said, long as I'm still vertical. Marcus stood, stretched, walked to the bronze soldier. He reached out and touched the name on the wall he'd avoided for so long. 3rd row, 7th from the left, PFC Timothy Ray Womack. Then, 4 rows down, a newer edition, a small plaque the town had installed in January. PFC William Billy Womack, beloved son, honored soldier, remembered. He pressed his palm, flat against the cold granite, feeling the letters under his skin. I'm still here, he said quietly. I'm still trying. The bronze soldier didn't answer. He just kept facing east, rifle raised, frozen in his eternal charge toward morning. But Marcus could have sworn the metal looked warmer in the spring light. Could have sworn the soldier's expression held something almost like peace. He walked back to his motorcycle, threw a leg over the seat, and kicked the engine to life. Deacon raised his coffee cup in salute. Marcus lifted a hand without looking back. The road stretched north toward Monroe, toward the church apartment, toward a life he was still learning to live. Behind him, The memorial grew smaller in his mirrors. The bronze soldier, the granite wall, the bench where a stranger had sat down beside him and offered a cup of coffee without asking anything in return. The dogwood scattered petals across the pavement like confetti. Marcus rode toward them. If this story moved you, subscribe so you never miss one, and tell us in the comments who showed up for you when you needed it most.